to have a good introduction?
I don't mind, really.
Yeah. This week's speaker is going to be Simon.
Hello.
Fine artist, painter.
Yes, etc. Painter and other things, which I'll talk about, but mostly a painter.
Fantastic. And I think if you find out, there's some tutorials arranged for afterwards.
Yeah.
So if you can just make yourself kind of known at the end, that's fine. Next week's speaker is going to be an architect whose name completely escapes me now. Usual time, usual place. So over to Simon. Thank you.
Hi, sorry for the late start. So my name's Simon. I'm a London-based artist. I work mostly in painting, but I also do use film, photography, drawing, and occasionally radio, which I'll talk about more as we go on. Now, I've put up this image of Batman to begin with as a kind of introduction. It's partly because it's a meme, which is, of course, an image that is explicitly tied to the internet. It's the kind of image that, whether it would be printed or painted or here, projected in a lecture theatre, it retains a sense of its origin. It's always an image from the internet, as well as having a content which will relate to some of the things I'm going to talk about shortly. So I graduated in 2012 with an MA in painting from the Royal College of Art, and I'm going to start today talking about the various stages as I went through education and my life as an artist that have led me up to here. And then I want to talk about my work and some of the projects and research that I've been involved in. I did my foundation in Cheltenham in 2002 and then went to Brighton to study painting. I hadn't originally planned to be an artist, actually. I wanted to be an actor, like this man. But I changed my mind at 16 because I realised I couldn't act. So perhaps not surprisingly, a love of actors and of film and the sense of the dramatic is something that's still a driving force in my work. When I finished my BA, I moved straight to London. I decided that I wanted to be there during my third year. And when I got there, I did the typical artist thing of moving into somewhere like this, which is a warehouse in East London. Somewhere that we could paint and live. It was very cheap, very practical. The downsides were that the plumbing was all DIY and none of us were plumbers, and there was no heating, so when it was icy outside I would have ice on the inside of my window as well. But the benefit of it was that we could use it to drive our own projects, so we could this is a studio space as a working studio, then we could paint the floor grey and it would look like this, and we called it Main Yard Gallery and started running a series of exhibitions and events, including screenings and things from there. And then after the show, we'd put it back to being a studio again. But the great thing about this was it was a good opportunity after graduating to experiment and keep my work driving forward during a time where the pressure of an institution wasn't there. So then in 2010, 4 years after graduating, I started at the Royal College. It's a 2 years master's programme. And at the end of the first year, you have a work in progress show, which is a big, slick, sexy, professional exhibition of where you are with your work and who you are as an artist. Now, ours was in summer 2011, and my biggest problem was I didn't actually have any work. And it wasn't for lack of trying. Since I'd arrived at the Royal College, my painting had gone down absolutely downhill rapidly, which wasn't the college's fault. But by the end of the first year, I had absolutely no idea what I was doing. My paintings were big, sludgy messes that did absolutely nothing at all for anyone. So I did the only thing I could think of, which was I made a video in which I did a striptease in my studio and danced naked around in front of all my horrible paintings. The film was called Everything You Ever Wanted. It was a joke in many ways, a joke on the idea of the painter struggling with his painting, a joke on the idea of producing art and how it's meant to be meaningful. A joke on the gay cliche of putting a naked man on everything to make it appeal to a gay market. A joke on the art cliche of putting a tortured soul in the studio to appeal to the art market. A joke on the idea that art making is a form of masturbation that makes us all look ridiculous. And in the end, is it really everything we ever wanted? But of course, the thing with jokes is they're never entirely meaningless, as nothing is. If you try making a truly meaningless piece of art, it's virtually impossible. You can make really bad art, but you can't make meaningless art. It'll always mean something to someone. And strangely enough, this video was enormously popular with my fellow students and with my tutors. It had come out of nowhere and saved my interim show, which my paintings would certainly not have done. And it enabled me to refocus on what really interested me by literally acting it out. So I'm going to talk about three principal themes today, if you can call them that recur in my work and have a strong influence on my practice as a whole. These are cliche, camp, and seriousness. Is cliche the enemy of authenticity? You can't quite see at the bottom. It's a tricky question. Cliche is much maligned for being tacky and valueless. Yet it is incredibly persistent. It never really goes away. So much so that we feel that we have to be on our guard to avoid it. And it seems to me that there's a lot more that can be done with cliche than simply put it up in a straight fight against authenticity. The dictionary defines cliche as a phrase or idea that has been used so often that it's no longer interesting or effective. What surprised me about this definition is it's incredibly subjective. No longer effective could mean sort of anything, really. If originality is cultural nutrition, then cliche is seen as the waste product, the bits that didn't nourish us or didn't digest properly. But yet cliches are endlessly enduring. They're judged harshly by some, but rarely destroyed. So if we see cliche as a waste product, why does society feed off it so happily, is my question. It's a bit gross, really, when you think the metaphor can take something of a graphic turn, and it ends up being a bit like the human centipede on a social scale. But unlike the human centipede, it doesn't destroy itself, it continues to grow. French philosopher Guy Debord, bit of theory, wrote The Society of the Spectacle in 1967. I don't know if anyone's read that. Have you read it? Society of the Spectacle? No? Okay, so I will talk about it very briefly. But in that he talked about the world having lost touch with authenticity, that everything had been replaced, everything that was once represented, everything that was once experienced, is now replaced by its representation, a poor imitation, so to speak. This is called simulacrum. Now, Debord believed that the spectacle is the endless parade of simulacra, driven by the modern preference for image and commodity over authenticity. So with all our shopping, media, political apathy, capitalist market forces, the internet and the X factor, it would be easy to think that Debord had been right all along, and that actually we are now blindly addicted to the spectacle, all stitched into the human centipede and we don't even know it. But I don't feel this idea seems accurate somehow. Perhaps our investment in cliche can be a bit less blind and a bit more knowing. Rather than being part of the human centipede, perhaps what we're doing is really just watching the gross bits of the movie over and over again on YouTube and trolling in the comments section, getting off on it in some way. And that's quite a different relationship to cliche. One that is abstracted, one that we are thrilled to indulge in, one that places us, not one that places us as victims of the world. Now in my practice, cliche is always nearby. It's something that I enjoy having present and having a conversation with. I think there's a great value in what cliche can do. Cliche is fun, it's naughty, it's cheeky, it's risky, and there's something of the guilty pleasure in cliche. And guilty pleasures can be surprisingly revealing about our individuality and culture at large. Camp. Every time I put this slide up, the word camp moves somewhere else. It was meant to be over that side, but never mind. You get the idea. Does my authenticity look big in this? So-called guilty pleasures recur in my practice endlessly. Diana Ross, a bit of disco, queer masculinity, and camp movie history, to name but a few. These things may be considered cliche now, but they were once very far from it. Most people now think of camp as innocuous, frilly, and meaningless. But there was once a time when camp was in fact disturbing and powerful, emerging when codes of behaviour and appropriateness were very strict, and everyone was expected to adhere to the same values. This image is of Stephen Tennant, who scandalised British society in the 1920s by basically being rich and doing nothing, but also by wearing makeup and gold dust in his hair and wearing very camp and flamboyant costumes, daring to do it in public. Disco also might be seen as something kind of innocuous. It's cheesy party music. But at the time, it was the first time that black culture, gay culture and feminism were free to be truly open about their views and enter the mainstream. And these emerging cultures wanted to celebrate. Disco was its soundtrack. Utopianistic and euphoric, it was a form of escapism from a world that allowed them freedom by law, but still viewed them with a great deal of prejudice. The image of a man in makeup or of a black female disco star like Donna Summer are seen as camp in a frivolous way now. But at the time they were not empty-headed and meaningless at all. They were symbols of great power and emergence. This is a painting by Daniel Sinsel. There's a sort of reclamation going on at the moment in contemporary art, which is sometimes called neo-camp. It's a kind of re-evaluation of camp. It's looking at camp again as a potentially subversive language, one that's unsettling and a path down which to access uncomfortable or surprising truths. Daniel Sinsel is an example of an artist working with camp. Some of his work is directly homoerotic, like this one, and others are more subtle. This piece explores images of power that are historically associated with men but have a subtle homoerotic flavour. The image, of course, refers to neoclassicism, an architectural style that itself referred back to ancient Greece. Now, the modern view of the history of ancient Greece sees it as containing two slightly opposing notions. One is the foundation of the sort of conventions of modern society, and the other is this famously liberated and slightly racy views on sexuality. At the time of neoclassicism, ancient Greece was a template for power and order. The sexuality element was sort of ignored, but as a kind of open secret. In this painting, the suggestion of the architecture of power and convention is held forever on the brink of collapse. It's a kind of slapstick anarchy, which in itself is quite camp. What infuses all of Daniel Sinsel's work is not so much the specificity of camp, but a kind of flavour of it. This is quite a camp picture of Susan Sontag, and she was the first to write about camp as a serious cultural phenomenon in 1964 in her paper Notes on Camp. She talks about camp being an essence, a sensibility rather than a theory. It's very difficult to pin down and not something that can be solidified. It's an enjoyment of artifice, a sensuality of the superficial. It questions conventional notions of seriousness. Here's a few examples of things that she gives that she considers to be camp. Tiffany lamps, Aubrey Beardsley, the original King Kong movie, but of course also the remake nowadays, and the Cuban pop singer La Lupe. The sensuality of the superficial is almost exactly what people either love or hate about camp. It's the reason it's seen as frivolous. It seems that it's not only inauthentic, it's directly anti-authentic, and that's quite a dangerous game. But camp is also a way to break through social conventions that may hide prejudices, and has historically been, on the one hand, trivial and silly, but on the other hand, provocative and progressive. Its skill has always been to balance both to great effect. And return again briefly to Stephen Tennant. Of course, what shocked society in the 1920s, we would hardly even notice now. Stephen Tennant's lip gloss in this photograph of him from 1927 caused a sensation, but also made space for Ziggy Stardust, who in turn helped pave the way for a character like RuPaul. The camp spirit can be a fighter. We could add many of our own ideas to camp now, of course, and here are a few of mine. The pumped-up artifice of Geordie Shore. The filtering and photoshopping of life on Instagram. Real Housewives from Anywhere You Like. And Britney Spears' Work Bitch. What I like about this one is it's like a kind of pop expose of the society of the spectacle. If we want a hot body, a Maserati, or to drink martinis in a bikini, then Britney tells us we better work, bitch. The idea of work as something that one does in earnest is replaced here with an act performed to connect us to the spectacle. It's conscious and unapologetic, enjoying its apparently misplaced sense of value. Now, all these things are camp in the way that they sensualise artifice and lovingly indulge it while understanding it enough for it to no longer be stated. These things don't let themselves off the hook by excusing themselves as camp. They just emerge out of the landscape of it and treat that position seriously. This is Serious Cat. So I'm just going to get some water. So Susan Sontag takes camp seriously. And was one of the first people to do that. Grayson Perry said, "Indulge your whims, but take them seriously." This idea of seriousness is one that's very hard to define as well. We like to think of art as being very serious, or in response to the idea that art might be too serious, we like to think of our art as not being serious at all. Either way, the definition of what seriousness really is seems to remain hidden somewhere at the back of the room. In the book Visual Cultures as Seriousness, Gavin Butt introduces his interest in the subject of seriousness through a conversation with his co-author about the value of gossip. From magazines to TV to the internet, to discussions with whoever in the kitchen, in the studio, in bed, gossip is a highly addictive and pervasive form of communication. But is it true or not? With gossip, we never really know. It stands with one foot in truth and the other foot in fiction, enveloping them both in its racy thighs until they emerge equally important. We value gossip precisely because we don't quite know how to take it. It isn't pro-seriousness because it might be false, and it isn't anti-seriousness because it might be true. What it does is it offers up a different relationship to seriousness, one that expands its possibilities and uses. Perhaps Susan Sontag would call it a camp relationship. In the 1990 documentary Paris is Burning, it explored the subculture of New York's drag balls in the 80s. Here the term realness was used to describe a form of authenticity that is implicitly known to be performance, but it's taken very seriously. The drag balls were a safe place for LGBT young people to get together and perform in front of everyone. There were categories that related to conventional social roles: executive realness, evening wear realness, military realness, in which participants who, on the outside world, would be shut out from these roles, could enter a private space and try to look like a real executive or like a real soldier. Seriousness here is turned on its head. People who society would call camp and renegade could, in private, wear the suit of an executive as a costume. The documentary is an interesting investigation into subculture, but also one that challenges and re-examines our ideas of normality and the drag involved in it. Cliche, camp, and the re-evaluation of seriousness play fast and loose with sincerity and authenticity, which is a highly dangerous area, because sincerity and authenticity are highly prized. Yet they too are very hard to define. Perhaps rather like seriousness, camp and cliche, they become at their most powerful when they teeter on the brink of their own undoing. It keeps them alive, it makes their hearts race, and perhaps being very really alive is the ultimate expression of authenticity. So in 2012 I went to Brazil. I'm going to get back to my work a bit now. To do a residency at a large arts university in Sao Paulo. I'd just graduated from the Royal College, and I'd applied for it while I was still studying. So I was told that when you graduate, everyone experiences this kind of hideous depression, and I thought, if everyone's going to be depressed, I'm going to Brazil. So I went to Sao Paulo. My application for the residency centred on the idea of using my time there to explore ideas of cultural cliche and queerness. Residencies are a great opportunity to go somewhere new and just make work without the kind of routines of work and home life, and just dedicate your time to it. And what appealed to me about Brazil was that its cliches are already so wild and sexy and cool, they're so established. It's a South American paradise of sexuality and liberation, and Carmen Miranda. The fact that these cliches were camp and tropical was a bonus because it gave me a lot to work with. So while I was there, I took some photos. This is my apartment, not much furniture or clothes, and did a lot of drawing. Most of my drawings were total crap, unfortunately, but I kept coming back to Carmen Miranda. She's perhaps the cheesiest of Brazilian cliches, so I'd expected that by travelling to Brazil I would have discovered something a bit more unexpected that I could work with. But Carmen Miranda was nagging away at me, so eventually I embraced her. I watched all the documentaries that I could find on YouTube. I went to her museum in Rio, which is here, and I went to her childhood home. I listened to her music in the gym. I went and I interviewed a variety of artists and designers about Brazilian cultural identity, queerness, and Carmen Miranda. She's a bit of a love-hate figure in Brazil, as you might imagine. Some people see her as a shallow Hollywood construct and a trivialization of Brazilian culture. However, some people are big fans of hers. This guy is called Dudu Bertolini. He's a well-known fashion designer and a judge on Brazil's Next Top Model. He said about her, she was an She was an artist. She was playing around with a lot of sense of humour, with a lot of Brazilian stereotypes. But she was not a stereotype of Brazil. She used the bananas and the carnival and everything. But if you look, there is no one like her in Brazilian culture. She's the only one. The famous Brazilian singer Caetano Veloso said about her in the 1960s that him and other Brazilian musicians called the Tropicalists looked to Carmen Miranda because they called her both their caricature and their X-ray. They were not afraid of the caricature of Carmen Miranda because they saw the interesting possibility of using something so cliched as a way of exposing the truth. This seemed to be a crucial part of my interest in Carmen Miranda, and also highlighted some of the key functions of the work that I've been making up to this point. At this time, the 30th Sao Paulo Biennale opened up, and I was asked to present a piece for radio at the Biennale radio station, Mobile Radio BSP. I said I would, even though I'd never worked with radio before, and I decided to explore my Carmen Miranda fascination in a different form, and that was to just put down the drawing materials and write about it. The result was, you can't really see, this was the kind of flyer for it, Escape's South American Way to International Love, which was an hour-long live radio documentary, beginning as a biography and developing into an exploration of the uses of cliché and their importance in queer expression, as well as cultural ideas of escapist fantasy. One thing that I referred to during this documentary was this episode of The Simpsons where they went to Rio. It's called Blame It on Lisa. In true Simpsons style, this episode explores a roll call of glaring Brazilian cliches, and in fact the mayor of Rio was so furious about it that he called for the episode to be banned. But of course, instead of reinforcing those stereotypes, The Simpsons did what The Simpsons always does, which is hold up a mirror to Western prejudice. Escapism is often built on stereotype and prejudice, and as this episode of The Simpsons highlights, the escapism in this episode is the escape to which the radio show refers. It's the escapism of the disco too, and the realness in Paris is Burning, and even the process of making paintings. The radio was a very liberating experience, and the great thing about it was a natural medium to discuss and address ideas and theories without trying to squeeze them into my paintings. And as a result, my paintings became suddenly much simpler. This work is called the Heroes series, and I produced it when I returned to the UK. Oh, it's not moving. Have I done something?
Yeah, the mouse pointer seems to be. Just click on it. Now try, yeah.
There we go. I'm leaning too loosely on the mouse. There we go. So I was taking part in a show at Simon Oldfield Gallery in London called Screw Your Courage to the Sticking Place. And this was a show intended to look at queer subjectivity and the sense of strength it required to make the personal visible. These paintings were addressing the idea of the heroic figure in film, myth, sexual imagery and queer history, while emptying out all their form and detail. Instead, they became like logos, empty vessels to carry an idea around that can be changed. In the room next door to these paintings, I made an installation that used the stairwell. That's not my work, that's a picture of the stairwell in the gallery. That used this stairwell to continue ideas of escapism and location that I talked about in my radio show. This time I chose Argentina, having visited there while I was in South America. The stairwell reminded me of the one in the film Sunset Boulevard, one of those architectural features that becomes psychological some way, almost like a character in its own right. Even the name of the film, Sunset Boulevard, is more about psychology than it is about geography. It's a Hollywood cliche, but it evokes the fading light over the mansions, the fading light of Gloria Swanson's career, the history of escapism, that's summed up in the name that is first symbolic, and then later geographical. Inspired by my visit to Argentina, I saw a different staircase in the gallery. I saw the stairs at the Casa Rosada, which is the presidential palace in Buenos Aires, where Evita lived. I took this photo while I was there. When I say Evita, of course, I mean Madonna. Not only is Evita a gloriously camp, tragic movie, but Casa Rosada also means pink house, which is too good a camp cliche to miss. There is a scene in the film where General Perón carries his dying wife up a huge staircase. It's the moment in the film, you can't really see that very well, but you can just make it out. It's the moment in the film where she realises for the first time that he really loves her, and the staircase makes them look so small and vulnerable. They are life fading away while the staircase is permanent. Now I know this is just a movie and everything is set up to be as dramatic and emotional as possible. The same is true of Sunset Boulevard. But that artificial sensuality is, after all, what makes things so camp. And this willing investment in the emotion of film, or a song, or a photograph, is part of that fractured relationship to seriousness. Taking the emotion seriously while knowing it sort of isn't. For the piece at the Simon Oldfield Gallery, I renamed the stairs at the Casa Rosada, and at the top of them I hung this print. I used a photograph of the stairs that I took in Buenos Aires and overlaid my face over the top, like the all-seeing eyes observing the human drama on the stairs below, like the eyes of Dr. Eckelberg in The Great Gatsby, who becomes an ironic metaphor for God and mortality. To accompany this, I painted a palm tree falling down the stairs. Now this was a reference to emblems of the exotic, of course, but also to vanitas paintings of the 16th and 17th century. These still life paintings used plants and skulls and various other objects as symbols for death and the temporary nature of life. My palm tree was playfully stealing some of the gravitas of the vanitas and making it into a camp statement. The idea of taking emotion seriously but knowing it's somehow fake was the subject of my second radio show, I Laughed at Love Because I Thought It Was Funny, which is a line from the classic Jerry Lee Lewis song, rock and roll song, Great Balls of Fire. This piece looked at the romantic storyline in the Hollywood musical, and how various elements of structure and style meant that the conventional romances being played out on screen are not actually as conventional as they first seem. Keeping with the rock and roll theme, I looked at the 1978 movie Grease, and contrasted it with the lesser-known Cry Baby from 1991. Cry Baby is heavily inspired by Grease, and is in fact a sort of pastiche made by queer filmmaker John Waters, with Johnny Depp playing the role that's based on Danny Zuko. In the radio piece, I discussed the structure of the Hollywood musical, its over-reliance on gender stereotypes, its inauthentic plot lines, and endless bursting into song everywhere. Hollywood musicals value the spectacle, as Guy Debord might have it, as much or if not more than the story. And this shift from narrative to spectacle disrupts our reading of the story. It's not a romantic narrative, but an expose of what a romantic narrative is. When we stop seeing these characters as authentic, they become a question on how we perceive. Excuse me. They become, like Carmen Miranda was to the Tropicalists, a crazy caricature that reveals hidden truths. These pieces, rather like my radio show, also featured a lot of music to keep them upbeat and entertaining. I think entertainment in art is something that doesn't happen very often. This is related to the idea of seriousness, of course. Entertainment is considered to be in opposition to that. But the idea of art that is both funny and entertaining, as well as intuitive and inspiring, is probably the dream combination for me. Which brings me to the most ambitious project that I've undertaken so far, for which this was the promo image. It's called the Everglades Pilot. It was a 3-part project starting with a painting show. The main driving force behind the Everglades Pilot was Michelle Pfeiffer's character in Scarface, Elvira Hancock. Now, Elvira is an example of my interest in paradoxical female movie characters, ones you love in spite of their actions, ones that are unexpected icons of feminism while seeming to be the opposite, ones that are morally ambiguous. Elvira is perfect for that. On the one hand, she can be seen as vain and shallow, a gangster's moll who is just a pretty object for her man. On the other hand, in a great deal of Scarface, she's the one in control. The men run after her while she pleases herself. She goes against the expected role of becoming a mother and refuses to give affection when it is asked of her. She is something of an island. In the end, Tony insults her in a restaurant, and she storms out and leaves him. We never see her again. She is called the final shot. I made several paintings of Elvira, examining her poses and the strength in her apparent blankness. In a similar way to the Heroes series, I presented her in a reduced colour palette with a lot of the detail removed. This work was installed with a wallpaper, one that I designed again on the basis of the idea of location and escapism. Scarface is set in Miami, and I wanted to evoke location through wallpaper in the way that DIY programs sell a lifestyle through interior design. The wallpaper design was made by Googling cliches about Miami, such as Miami Beach, Miami Sunset, and the Everglades. They were then layered on top of one another and adjusted. This was the individual tile that was repeated. To make the colours much more camp and trashy, it's actually a lot more sort of neon than that. And the final print, while inspired by dreams of a holiday, has actually become a gaudy and intense environment. The day after the show opened, we got a puppy. We called him Sven. This doesn't have a lot to do with my work, but as pictures of puppies is so camp, I thought I'd put him in. Back to Miami. So to coincide with the show at Simon Oldfield Gallery, I'd written and recorded a radio show called The Excerpts from the Everglades Pilot. This was a fictional narrative about myself and Elvira Hancock living together in a villa in Florida. The story is set just after Scarface finishes. Tony is dead and Elvira doesn't want to go back to Miami. She is in fact originally from Baltimore, which is where John Waters sets all of his films, but that's a coincidence. The radio piece reveals that the Everglades pilot that gives all the work its name is in fact a speedboat that carries Elvira from adventure to adventure, away from danger and into the endless horizon. It's her escape vehicle. And in the end, she escapes from me too, except of course she was probably never really there. This is a poster for the third part. The third instalment of the trilogy, if you like, it took place a month later at a project space called Legion TV in London. It was called the Everglades Pilot After Party, and it took the form of an installation referencing tropical cliches and escapist fantasy, all put together with cheap and very camp decorations to make a kind of party room within a gallery. There were even flashing lights and a smoke machine. I developed the idea of creating an interactive happening within the space that drew on concepts of utopia with participants unaware that they were contributing to an artwork. In other words, it was a disco. The gallery opening then became the main piece of work. It was pushing the idea from private view into a party space. We sold very strong cocktails and hired a DJ, and the installation I had designed became activated by its participants. It was a conclusion to the series and also an exercise in combining art space and entertainment space until one becomes fused with the other. After a few months to make new work, I staged a two-man show called Two-Man Show with artist Paul Kindersley at the Centre for Recent Drawing. All the drawings in the show were done with felt tip pen. Mine are the framed ones and Paul's are the larger unframed ones. We curated the space very freely, allowing our work to mix together to cross-reference narratives, sometimes touching and overlapping one another, suggesting new narratives as they trailed around the space. These are some of my drawings from the show. This one's called The End, which is the final moment in Thelma and Louise. And this cropped image from I Am Love, Tilda Swinton. And these were both images that dealt with the idea of freedom and loss, or freedom through loss. And images of statues that take on a sort of over-dramatic sense of human pain or loneliness. There are also very simple, straightforward portraits. This one of David Lynch, for example, and this one of Manny from Scarface. This composite image was called I'm on an Island, where a man from a 70s porn film sits on a backdrop from the 1930s holiday poster for Antigua. I don't know if this is going to... oh yes. The final work that I'm going to talk about is a short film, I'm Still Waiting, that was shown at the Austrian Association for Women Artists in Vienna, which is that TV screen down in the corner. The Institute doesn't show work solely by female artists, of course, but it shows work that deals with gender and resisting conventional views on sex, sexuality and its social role. Now this is actually a clip, but I don't know if it's going to play. It keeps not playing. It's not going to play, so this is the image in the movie. Where am I? Yeah, so the title of the film comes from the heartbreaking Diana Ross song, I'm Still Waiting, and that forms the soundtrack. The song is somewhat over-sentimental and paints women as fawning and overly emotional while the men in their lives decide their fate. The video that accompanies it is an image of Ramesses II taken in the British Museum. And as the song plays, there is a very slow pan at the statue. It starts kind of chest height and moves very slowly up to his face. It makes Ramesses the object under scrutiny. Perhaps he is who Diana Ross is singing to. His stone body becomes something to stare at, like Torso of the Week in Heat magazine. Questioning the gender and the sexuality of the gaze. As his face emerges, there's a faint smile on his lips, and both a blankness and a softness to his eyes. We invest in them so much more, having waited for them for the entire duration of the song. The song makes the situation of looking at an ancient statue into a sensual one, which it wouldn't normally be. But also it's a bit boring. The pan is very slow, and the length of the song allows for your mind to wander. As Diana Ross sings about being such a fool for still waiting, we start to wonder if we're a bit of a fool for still waiting too. In the end, the only thing to wait for is to look deep into Ramesses' shallow eyes, which, although they're 5,000 years old and totally emotionless, are sort of quite hot in a weird way. The spirit of artificial sensuality and camp emotion is what's driving the current paintings that I'm making at the moment. They're unfashionable homages to beauty in a way that's not very beautiful but quite contrived. Somehow I hope that a sense of dedication still comes through. I'm not going to talk about them in any great depth because they're not finished. But the inspiration behind this current body of work is a kind of sense of real love. Or Paris is Burning might call it romantic realness. It's both genuine and euphemistic, about image and about investment, about the investment in image and about the image of investment. They're paintings of images that I find compelling, genuinely, created in a way that I hope will bring out that compulsion. It is serious while the campness or cliche of that compulsion remains in the image. They're as true as they are false, a bit of romantic gossip, as seen on TV. So I think illusion is no bad thing. The illusions that camp, cliche and seriousness help to create are able to flex and alter, be manipulated by us or by the viewer, and remain unpredictable and continue to ask questions of us. Our conventions and our relationship to the worlds we occupy and the guilty pleasures we enjoy, and how revealing they might be. Incidentally, here's another picture of my dog, all grown up. Thank you very much. So that gets a bit quicker every time. Any questions? I hope that made sense.
Here comes the theory question from a theory student. So a lot of your imagery is kind of what you call it's kind of a queerist identity that's been formed in relation to prejudice. So so forth. So what happens when that society no longer you can identify as being perfect? Where does that leave the immigrant?
I think it changes. I think that's kind of. I think there's that sense that in that potential sort of meaninglessness that then develops out of this camp imagery. Once it was very important in a very particular way, but I think in the way that it positions itself now, it just has a different kind of questioning role. It's not so much about sort of fighting a cause, so much as just sort of playfully questioning or teasing another meaning out of something. I mean, there's that Judith Butler quote about queer theory, which is that queer as a term will continue to flex and alter, and it's always changing, depending on what it needs to position itself to question. So it's not sort of this very fixed idea of we live in a racist, sexist, homophobic society, therefore, bam, we need these isms, although actually all those things are probably still true, but in a more subtle way. But the kind of the need for that theory at that time has sort of changed now to just be other questions, sort of questions of how do you approach feminism in a kind of fourth wave feminist period that we're in now, or how do you approach queer theory when we have gay marriage? But these things are still kind of, there's always this draw to pull back to something quite conventional and quite set, and I think there's a benefit in kind of teasing something else out of it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it's just something I wondered about, the sense that I understand why images of things like Judy Garland and things resonate 30, 40 years ago. You still find them resonating now, you still find a new generation pick up those images, and it must be now for different purposes. It's that interesting.
I think in a way it's kind of just exposed maybe what the purpose really was underneath it. I mean, there's something about Judy Garland, for example. I didn't put her in. I sort of tried to choose sort of slightly different kinds of queer imagery, but even the sort of the real classics like Judy Garland, it's kind of, there's something about a tortured soul that never goes out of fashion, and I think there's something about that sort of. And I think maybe traditionally it would have been seen as maybe more of a queer thing, but now, of course, all of my straight female friends are camp aficionados. They've got more camp in their house than I have. So it's very much, it's kind of like the gender of it has changed, but I think its position is still quite potent.
You borrow heavily off other people's creations.
Yes.
So where do you see your role as an artist or creator within this?
Well, I think that the borrowing is something that's sort of part of the language of what I do. So there's sort of in a way the borrowing is kind of crucial, because it's what I enjoy doing is taking these existing conversations and sort of either spinning them out in a different direction or kind of developing an alternative view on it. So things like the Scarface thing, I made several months worth of work about Scarface. My creativity in that was certainly not in making Scarface, but simply sort of finding it as something that I felt I could start conversations from. Things like the excerpts from the Everglades pilot, where I stole the character and all of the story that developed was based on the idea that people would have seen Scarface and they know who Althea Hancock is, and they brought all of that, so I can kind of cut through all of that and just get to, okay, you know who we're talking about, so let's have this conversation. So I think there's something. It's a position that's got me into trouble in the past, and it probably still will. But it's something. I like the idea of actually almost doing nothing to things sometimes. Taking things and doing the tiniest thing. And it really gets up people's nose actually, but it's kind of, I sort of feel like there's something about reframing these things, within the context perhaps of an exhibition. I mean, for my MA show, one of the pieces I made was I found by just when you stalk people on Facebook, we all do it, so pretend we don't, and I just usually go through the kind of like just sort of looking at my friends' hot friends, and you just kind of go like that for ages when you've got nothing else to do. And I came across this guy who, I have no idea who he is, I should have written his name down so I could find him again, but he just filled his Facebook wall with really over-the-top selfies, like he was quite muscly and by a pool, and it was all like really, and I just nicked one and blew it up 3 meters by 4 meters and printed it onto PVC. And I think there was something about that the fact that it was so conspicuously a selfie, so definitely not me or someone that I knew, but it was just this kind of this internet thing. And what I'd done to it really was just to find it and print it up. But I think there's something, sometimes that can work and other times it's not enough. I mean, I think it's a dangerous area, but I think it's about how these things become conversational tools rather than whole new spaces you're making. That's how it works for me, I think.
So that links on to my question really about, I was interested in your techniques of painting and drawing, and I was curious, you mentioned something about you wanted to show the attention you're giving it, something like that.
Yeah.
So is that what the intention behind your different ways of approaching art making?
Yeah.
About the focus and the...
Yeah, I think that's the thing. I think they're kind of, I mean, with the paintings that I'm doing recently, which I kind of glossed over because they're all unfinished. So, you know, you have even that one of Ludwig that I had up for ages made me feel a bit nervous because it's not finished. And I don't, but you know, with that one, for example, you know, what I've done in a sense is just to kind of flatten it out, crop it, and change the colours, because you know it's Helmut Berger playing Ludwig II in a Visconti movie, and all these things I'm hoping are sort of already there. So we can start from that point and move on with then making it quite sort of sickly and flat and kind of, you know, a bit too close. And it's like, you know, very television screen-like. And so it's that kind of thing of wanting to bring that out in the image. And there's one that I've done recently of Vanilla Ice, which is quite kind of, it feels like, I feel like I've sort of tried to enhance its kind of magazine-y feel. You know, it's very Smash Hits 1995, trying to kind of get the juice of Smash Hits 1995 into the painting, which involves some manipulation of the image, but essentially it's just a picture of Vanilla Ice that I've taken from Smash Hits 1995. But it's that kind of, it's trying to bring these things out without overstating them to the point that I feel like I'm trying to lead it too much. Like, you know, I want it to be more like Britney Spears' Work Bitch, where she just does it, because she's just like, I'm going to do this now. And actually for me that then is really a live space for me to get involved in it, rather than a piece of art about Britney Spears that might say, oh, and she's doing this, you know, and she's doing this, you know, and I'm going to lead you to think this and this. So I kind of try and step back from making too many leading points, but just try and sort of bring out some of the flavour, if that makes sense. And the drawings, you know, I'm always drawn to hair, just lots of hair. So I'll usually kind of go through and just pick things based on hair. And be there for ages with a pen drawing the hair, and then just go, and the face. But, you know, because it's the hair that's really like, you know, it's got so much about fashion, about movement, about poise, about drama, about all this stuff just in a hairdo. So it's that kind of thing of sort of focusing on. Which actually, I thought I had an image in here of that, so I don't know where that one's gone, sorry.
So I suppose that sort of links into my next one. As a practicing artist out there, you're trying to market artifice, but how do you market artifice with integrity as an artist?
Well, the art market is very artificial. But I mean, it's not. I don't know if I would say I want to market artifice. It's more that I think there's conversations of integrity that can come out of things that don't appear to be. And so it's not about sort of trying to adopt a position where I say, fake is great, fuck integrity, who cares, and bam, here's my garbage. Love it. You know, it's not like, it's more about saying, okay, this is a problematic image, or this is a problematic area, so, you know, but there might be ways in which I can sort of I can draw out a conversation which has some integrity. And I think things like pop culture and media culture and movies and all this sort of stuff that we do invest genuine time in because it gives us something very real. I think that's the point at which I want to sort of go in and say, well, I'm going to trust that we're not all mad, and that if we're putting something real into it, because it's giving us something real back. And actually sitting down and reading Sartre is less likely to appeal to us on a Saturday night than going and watching a movie. So what is that movie doing? It must be doing something. And then there's these, you know, one of the things that I talk about in the radio shows quite a bit is, you know, things like with Grease, for example, you know, a movie that seems so so superficial, but actually, of course, has caused 30 years of feminist debate about the role of Sandy in that movie, and loads of queer debate about the structure of the Hollywood musical. So there's all these conversations of real integrity that can come out of something which appears to be just entertainment, because I don't think anything ever is just entertainment, because it appeals to something somewhere, and it's finding that something is where the integrity is, I think. So I don't think, I wouldn't like the work to be seen as having no integrity, although it has been said before. But it's usually trying to kind of explore that in unexpected places.
That's good. No, it was more of a leading question rather than a statement.
So I wasn't. No, I'm not offended. No, don't worry. But yeah, I think. Does that answer the question? Or?
Totally.
Yeah. Okay. Great.
As a practicing artist, do you get interest in your work as kind of like people wanting to buy your work?
Not as much as I would like.
Yeah, or are you just doing it to spark conversation? And if so, how are you making your money?
I don't. I sell strokes of my dog to make money. No, I don't sell a great deal of work. It's not a great market at the moment. So in terms of market stuff, which is the kind of ugly bit that nobody wants to talk about, but actually is really important, I am represented by a gallery who does sell my work, not with great frequency, but that is sort of across the board fairly typical at the moment. But the thing is, I think that for me the kind of balance is that first and foremost I make my work in my studio on my own in a space where I'm connecting with it or not, and that's where it really has to start. Whether my gallerist will then come into the studio and go, that is disgusting, get it out of my sight, or I love it, I'm going to stick it in a show, is kind of what happens. I can't predict that, I don't know. And there's been plenty of things that he will say, no, that's not, we can't sell that, we're not, and so that stuff he doesn't take, but I've still made, and I would still consider that to be an important part of my work. So it's kind of, I don't think the two are mutually exclusive, but I do think that, and maybe this is me being a sort of a romantic, but I think that it is fundamentally important that you are having conversations with your work first. So, that is the driving force behind it. I make it, it's my personal space. When it becomes public, it's something else. In a market situation, that's kind of, you can't think about that when you're making it, I don't think. Or at least I don't. Except in things like making sure I prime my canvases properly. But apart from that,
So do you have separate work? Like, obviously this is referencing a lot of other stuff, films and stuff. Do you have other work that doesn't? Or is this everything that you do, and do you think that's why it affects your sales? Because it's
crap.
not such a small market. I don't mean that.
Well, I think the art world is a small market. Sort of generally. I mean, I think the thing is that when there's different levels you can enter it, and neither one is better than another. I mean, you can make work that's more popular and sells for maybe less, but more frequently, or you can make work in a different way. I mean, my work is quite particular, and it's very particular to me. And the people who have bought my work and who do buy the work, sort of, will often come back for the next bit of the conversation in a way. Like it's that kind of building up of a relationship with a collector. But it is a high risk strategy. I mean, I don't have other work. No, I mean, I think actually selling paintings is really, really hard. Whether you're selling them for £100 or £100,000, it's a hard thing to do to make money. So if I was going to make work that was more saleable, that was going to give me maybe a more regular but a smaller income, then actually that's just as much of a full-on, full-time position as doing something more sort of niche and more personal. So I think neither one is better than the other, but they're both they're both really hard. So actually to do both, to sort of make one work and then be like, oh, I'll just make them and sell it. It's like that stage between making them and selling it is not just like that. It's actually requires everything you've got to kind of make it happen.
I didn't mean it as an insult. I didn't mean it to sound like that. I just meant because it must be such a niche market because you're referencing other things. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean it's a niche market in the sense that like with so much of like contemporary art, it can be misunderstood. It can be read in different ways. It can be seen as something completely different or not. I mean, I think it is a niche market. It is, but I think all contemporary art is a niche market. So I think that's kind of it's not something that I do it primarily because these are conversations that I really want to have, that I feel the need to have, that I get excited by having. So that's why I do it. If I wanted to not do that and hold a paintbrush and make money, it's a lot more money in painting and decorating. I'd just do something like that. So it's kind of I mean the thing about the niche thing, it scares. I mean it does keep me awake at night. I'm not pretending it doesn't, but it's you've got to do it for love, man. First, and then cash later, maybe never.
Yeah.
I teach. That's how I make my money.
I'm back again. I'm
Hello.
sorry.
That's right.
Just thinking about your you're living in this world of character, of glamour, of personality. How does it impact upon your life as a person, not as an artist?
Well, I suppose I don't know. I don't know if I didn't indulge in it all the time, then I don't know how different I would be. I think we all do. I think that's kind of. I mean, that sort of iPod music video thing where you're walking down the street and you're fabulous because the music is and everything you do is perfect timed. I think and everybody does that. Everyone does that, don't they? Yeah, everybody does that, clearly. And you sort of walk along and you're kind of walking along and you go, look at the bus stop, bam, and then the beat drops and you're just like, wow, this is amazing. This is like a music video. I think there's that kind of engagement that I think affects, well, I thought it affected everybody, but maybe not. I think it affects more people than are admitting it. But I think there is that sort of, I think it does kind of. I'm a workaholic, so I'm working at home drawing, and I work in my studio painting, and I'm working on the bus doing something else. So it's kind of, it's there all the time. But I don't know how it affects me as a person. I don't go out dressed up as, Britney Spears or anything. I probably would actually. I mean, I've done Marlene Dietrich, but not Britney. Marlene is a bit classier.
Absolutely.
So thank you, Simon.
Thank you very much.